Guys, I'm bringing the party to you. Of the people in this room, which one is A, wearing a spangly outfit, and B, not of use?
Sir, please put down the spear.
Yeah, big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Well, let me know if Real Power wants a magazine or something.
That man is playing Galaga. Thought we wouldn't notice, but we did.
WDW Radio, your information station.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to the WDW Radio Show, your Walt Disney World information station. I am your host, Lou Mangello, and this is show number 517. I'm here once again, not only to help you have the best possible experience when you go to the Disney parks, but I also want to bring you a little bit of Disney magic wherever you are, not just with the podcast, but with my videos, blog, live broadcasts on Facebook every Wednesday night, books, audio tours, special events, and more. You can find everything over at WDWRadio.com. So the upcoming release of Marvel's Avengers: Infinity War is not just an important film and milestone in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it's one that might also affect the Disney parks as well. This week, I've assembled some of Earth's and the WDW Radio Nation's mightiest heroes to count down to Infinity War. We'll discuss all the films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in order and share our top 5 MCU films. We'll also look at what we expect from Infinity War, spoiler-free, and give you a primer on what we know, what we think we know, the cast, characters, and maybe even what we think might be coming to the Disney parks in the not-so-infinite future. I'll then have the answer to our last Walt Disney World trivia question of the week, and I'll pose a new challenge for your chance to win a Disney Prize package. Then stay tuned to the end of the show. I'll have more information about upcoming events, beats of the month, your voicemails, and more. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of the WDW Radio Show. In recent years, Disney has grown beyond the parks and the films and the entertainment created by and through Walt Disney. And over time, Disney has grown to include Pixar, Muppets, Star Wars, soon to be Fox, and of course Marvel. They've pretty much embraced my entire childhood. In fact, Disney has been acquiring, enveloping, and really embracing these properties much as one would collect infinity stones in a gauntlet, you could say. And of course, that leads us to today, where we, as Disney and Marvel enthusiasts, are counting down the days, and for today's purposes, the movies, to Avengers: Infinity War, and what's to come afterwards. Not just in the movies, but maybe in the Disney parks as well. So this week, I, like a two-eyed Nick Fury, am looking to assemble some of Earth's and the WDW Radio Nation's mightiest heroes to count down to Avengers: Infinity War, and invite you, my friend, true believer, to sit with us and join us as well. And together, we're going to discuss all the films in the Marvel Cinematic Universe leading up to Infinity War in order, as well as what we know, what we think we know, the characters, our top 5-ish movies in the MCU, and maybe, just maybe, what we think might be coming to the Disney parks in the not-so-infinite future. So I would like to welcome some fellow Avengers, some first-timers to the show, some repeat visitors as well. Corey Bassett, it is great to see you once again. Your Infinity Gauntlet literally in hand.
Hey, everybody.
I too am wielding my Infinity Gauntlet. And I think everybody else is a first-timer. So in no particular order, I want to welcome Stuart Boyles.
Nice to be here today, Lou.
Ray Keating.
Lou, I could check it off my bucket list. I'm a guest on your show. This is great.
I have been a guest on your show. So turnabout is fair play. And Jesse McCullough, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you, Lou. And I would have to agree. This becomes the highlight of the day pretty quick.
You've clearly had a very boring Sunday afternoon. So before we get into talking about the films and our excitement for Infinity War, and we're doing this via video so I can see a lot of you guys in your backgrounds, in your physical backgrounds where you are, as well as your personal backgrounds, have been Marvel enthusiasts and comic book enthusiasts. So give me a little bit of a personal bio in terms of, your love and interest, when it started with Marvel. Are you a comic book nerd? Are you a cinematic universe nerd? Give me you and your love of Marvel and what sort of brought you to this place. And today on the show, we'll sort of go in that same order. So Corey?
So I watched the very first Iron Man. Iron Man was always one of my favorites. I had two main comic book series when I was growing up, the Silver Surfer series, and I had the paperback Iron Man 2020. So that's really where I started. And I just watched, the MCU movies as they came out, one after the other, good or bad. They kind of brought me to where I am today. And I blame mainly Lou and the Star Wars to get me into the Marvel side as well, because you can't really be a full geekdom side if you're not including Marvel as well.
It's a good time to be a geek. It's
a great time.
The geek is the new black, really. Like years ago, we would get beaten up for being comic book nerds, and now all of a sudden, it's we're being embraced. So, Stuart, what about you?
I was not a comic book nerd growing up. I was a movie nerd, and so when when these movies started coming out, I'd see them occasionally, and then I really got into them as they've progressed. So much so that I contacted one of my favorite podcasts, begged them to be a guest host, and now I'm a regular co-host on that podcast. That's the Welcome to Level 7 podcast. So look that up, put that in your podcatcher. We review all the MCU movies all the time. So
nice. Jesse, what about you?
Well, I'll tell you, Lou, I go back quite a way. When I was in second grade, which was a long time ago, my old man bought a comic book collection from the art teacher in the elementary school. And he had all the old Marvels back to Fantastic Four number 10. And however old I was then, 7, 8 years old, I was able to leaf through those. So I've been a comic book fan since the spring of 1984. And as all true Marvel people know, we remember our first Marvel comic, and I can tell you that it was A-Team number 1 from March of '84. And I can also tell you that the first mainstream Marvel comic I got was Fantastic Four 266, which from a timeline perspective, that would have been about the time of the original Secret Wars series. So that's quite a while now.
Wow, the man knows. Not only do you know your comic, it's like your first girlfriend. Like you were able to recite exactly when and where you went and the movie and how she broke up with you, but you remember exactly the issues too. Ray, what about you?
Little Ray Keating, 9, 10 years old, used to pedal up to 7-Eleven on Long Island, and the spin rack. I'm that old. And I would always look for Captain America and the Avengers. Those were my big two. And that's where I started and kept reading. I won't tell you what year that was, but I kept reading into the 80s and then took a break. And then when I had my own kids, I had an excuse to get back into it. And I've been reading back into comics ever since. And I love the movies, love the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Nice. So for me, I go back and I'm probably, I don't know, Ray, you and I are probably the oldest guys so one of my very first comics I actually bought. My parents had an antique business and at an antique booth in a flea market. We did an estate sale, and we went up to we went into this woman's house, and in her attic, she had this old hardbound comic strip book called Mutt and Jeff, and I had Mutt and Jeff like number 1 of this thing, and I realized that there was this whole world. But I had been a comic book kid. I wasn't allowed to ride my bike down to Belvedere Avenue and go to the Belvedere Variety Store, but I can see the magazine rack on the left wall, and Ray, like you, the spinning rack of comics. And I was always a Spider-Man guy. I've been a Spider-Man kid since as far back as I can remember. I don't remember my first date with Spider-Man, unlike Jesse, but I still have, and I gave to my brother who became the big comic book collector. I gave him, hundreds of Spider-Man comics. And now I'm sort of coming full circle, going back and, taking my son to comic book stores and comic book conventions. Like, that's the thing that we do together. Yep. And I'm picking up old issues that I remember that I had as a kid. I have one sitting right over there. And I'm like, I remember reading this and I love going through now. And there's something about the feel and the smell of a comic book and those old ads. Like, if you were getting sand kicked in your face for $1, you could be huge, and X-ray glasses and all these different things. And some of these books that I had as a kid. And I remember growing up, not just loving sort of this escape and I related very much, and we can talk more about this too in terms of our favorite character. I related and still relate very much to Peter Parker. He was the nerdy kid. He wasn't a jock. He didn't have a lot of friends. I hope that I was and still was a person of integrity. And, I didn't have great power or great responsibility, but I believe in that tenet very, very dearly. But there was still something that resonates with me in terms of not just Spider-Man, the superhero, but Peter Parker, the kid. And I remember growing up watching the so very bad Amazing Spider-Man TV. I remember seeing Spidey Super Stories on the Electric Company.
Wow.
I know, I'm
That's
really
awesome.
old. And I still remember watching on Saturday, I'm going to get choked up. I remember watching on Saturday mornings a cartoon, a series that I loved back then, I still love now. And it was the Spider-Man animated television series that originally debuted back in 1967. Obviously, I was born in 1968, so I watched reruns in syndication all 3 seasons, and the Spider-Man theme song and J. Jonah Jameson and Peter's character and that raw hand-drawn animation and those classic Spider-Man villains from the comic books like Mysterio. And I still love the Green Goblin and the Lizard and the Vulture. And I can still see Peter Parker in his blue suit with his yellow vest and white shirt and red tie. It was the Steve Ditko design. I still have that classic theme song on my phone and obviously playing over and over in my head. And I've watched some of those original shows on videos, and you can still get some of them on YouTube. And does the animation hold up? Of course not. But that was just so much an important part of my childhood, sort of growing up, because I loved that character. I loved that show so very much. And my office is still decorated, adorned, whatever you want to call it, with original Spider-Man comic books and covers and posters and Funko Pops and artwork. And still one of the most wonderful things that has ever happened to me as a result of this show and this incredible journey that you allow me to be on was a letterer from Marvel, knowing my love of Spider-Man and being a listener to the show, actually wrote me, I'm going to get choked up again, wrote me in to Spider-Man 700, spoiler alert, the death of Peter Parker, which, God forbid there's a fire in my office. We think about that one, once your family's out, what's that one thing you're going to grab? My Spider-Man 700 that's signed by Stan Lee, because another listener who's a friend saw he was coming to a comic book convention relatively near, a couple hours away from his house. He stood online for 4 hours to get Stan Lee to sign it for me. Like both of those gestures, the obviously writing me into a Spider-Man comic book, and that other person spending so much time and effort and then bringing it to me, in Walt Disney World, means so much to me because of how important the comic books and Spider-Man was to me as a kid. And by kid, I mean, a 49-year-old adult. Oh, how I loved The Incredible Hulk with the late Bill Bixby. He was not just Eddie's father from The Courtship Of, but he was also a somewhat misnamed. He was David Banner instead of Bruce. He was David Banner instead of Bruce Banner, but I loved Lou Ferrigno in The Incredible Hulk and watching him on CBS on Saturday nights or Sunday nights. So clearly, that very long explanation will tell you, speaks volumes as to why I didn't date very much growing up because I was doing all those different things that was not necessarily endearing me to the fair sex, but that's okay because it's all come back around because many, many years ago, and I can't believe it's been a decade and 18 films that the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been brought to the big screen. And I want to sort of almost qualify it in terms of saying the Marvel characters and the Marvel stories have been brought to life and done the right way. There has not been a shortage of superhero movies. Some have not necessarily been as awesome as we would like them to be. And I think as we talk going forward about what is to come in the future, maybe we'll see some of those movies done right. But maybe with the way we should sort of talk about counting down to Infinity War is to start off by helping people prep by going through the Marvel Cinematic Universe in order of release, not necessarily the order of the chronological order in terms of story, but in the order of release. We can briefly recap them and maybe how they're going to impact and affect the universe and Infinity War and sort of this Infinity War primer. So I think let's start at the very beginning. Let's go back to 2008 and Iron Man, and we can maybe touch on this for a second. This was a very interesting time in terms of Marvel itself. This was not a company that was always very, very strong. They were on the verge of bankruptcy many, many times, right, which is part of the reason why so many of these characters were sold or rented or licensed to these other studios, which was a way for Marvel to sort of stay afloat. So maybe touch on that a little bit. The pre-Marvel Cinematic Universe, what did it look like in terms of these characters on screen?
Well, you had Spider-Man and the
not so amazing the not so amazing Spider-Man. The Not So Amazing Spider-Man and the Sam Raimi films. Those are really good. If you remember those were really well done. The third one aside. Right. It's like The Godfather. 1 and 2 are awesome. We don't talk about 3 and the dancing.
We don't talk about 3. It's amazing how many trilogies that applies to and how many it doesn't. The Sam Raimi films were very good and they still hold up really well. But I think that was the first time you could really see, okay, it doesn't have to be this weird sort of cartoony thing on the screen. It can actually be a real life, people with real life problems.
Yeah, and the X-Men movies as well. I mean, when you think back, both of those out of the chute, I thought were pretty good, and that was that leap forward in terms of all of us waiting to see good comic book movies, and it's something to live up to what we saw on the pages of the comic books. And all of a sudden technology caught up, right, to our imaginations. And those are the ones coming out of the chute. And I still love those movies today, both the Spider-Man and the X-Men ones.
Yeah, that first Spider-Man for me was, taking the cartoony version of a character like that and putting it into a more dramatic scene where they have real stakes, real actual values. That was something that stuck with me a lot. I mean, that's probably the only Spider-Man film that outside of Homecoming now, but growing up, that's the only one I ever watched. Just it hit home. It did it for me.
Yeah, I would chime in that I think that it was the X-Men movie that made me realize that this can be done and it can be done well. The characters may be a little different than what I had expected, and I think that proved true over the course of the X-Men franchise. But when it comes down to it, you were able to see that they were able now to translate things that previously we were only able to see in our imagination into something that we could see on the screen. And I think that's really when I think it made all of us true believers, if you will, because prior to that there were some made for TV movies or direct to video movies that were out there. We can go back. I don't know if we want to go into the Hasselhoff Nick Fury area or not, but but I think at that point that's what turned the corner. And then whenever you come to 2008 and Iron Man, now you can have something with quite a blueprint behind it.
I'm really surprised and a little disappointed that none of you mentioned Howard the Duck from 1986, because really when you talk about the pinnacle of the Marvel universe, but look, we sort of laugh at that, but it was a Lucasfilm movie. Like, we expected it almost to be great, and it was not. There were
we got a lot of great stuff. The Howard the Duck model. I mean, yeah, he's goofy or whatever, but that's a really well done model. It's a really well done character.
And look, I'm sure. And look, when we first saw Howard the Duck in the with the Collector, I think a lot of us sort of internally or outwardly cheered, but the Fantastic Four just they can't seem to get it right, no matter how many times they try. I was not a fan of the Daredevil or the Fox version of the Universal version of the Hulk or Punisher. I think the Blade series was the best of the pre-Marvel Cinematic Universe films because I think Wesley Snipes, he very much was the Blade character. And I know he actually tried to have a Black Panther movie. He wanted to be Black Panther, but I think he was so far into being associated with the Blade character. But it comes up to 2008, and I almost imagine that this was very much a, hey, let's just give this a shot and see what we can do and see if we can make these movies right. And, all the credit in the world, in my opinion, goes to Kevin Feige for his vision, not just in terms of the casting of the film, and we'll talk a little bit about, the importance of casting, but how I think Jon Favreau, he was the guy from Rudy, and he was so, and all of a sudden I think because they are comic book fans and nerds, knew how to translate these stories off the page and onto the screen. And when we talk about things like, all right, so let's sort of quickly talk about casting and the importance of it. You guys mentioned Tobey Maguire, and I think Tobey Maguire was a great Peter Parker, and he was an awful Spider-Man. The same way I think that Andrew Garfield was a horrific Peter Parker, but he was great in the costume, because I think everybody that we're going to talk about tonight, they're really, all these actors have to play two roles. They are playing the human persona, and they have to play the superhero. And Robert Downey Jr. was the perfect Tony Stark, because all the things that Tony Stark was going through with, what Robert Downey Jr. went through as well. And I think he translated that perfectly. So give me some of your thoughts on, Iron Man, the 2008 Iron Man, your impressions of it then, and sort of how you think it fits into the MCU now.
I'll take my initial thought as I was thinking about this today was, when you look back, it's easy to miss how risky this was. We've got the experience. They've succeeded. They're doing great. But think about what they were doing in 2008. They were taking Robert Downey Jr. That was a roll of the dice. They imagined that they were going to create this entire, cinematic universe to some degree at that point. That was never done before. And, quite frankly, I know somebody said they're an Iron Man fan, but, I can remember in 2008, I was like, you're coming out of the shoot with Iron Man? Yeah. At that time, it was kind of like Iron Man. And now it's, Iron Man. Yeah, you dope. Why would you ever question that, right? So it's a salute to Marvel for figuring this out and taking the risk and going out there, and they made a wonderful, that to me, that's the best Iron Man film still.
Mm-hmm. And they did that right, because they didn't just start with, we're going to make this entire franchise of 10 years of movies and get you to Infinity War. They made one good film. They did it the right way with the right people. And then they added that little kicker of, we're going to keep going with this. And that's what they did, is they kept building on the very first success. And Happy Hogan did a great job.
Well, I think they set the bar very high right off the bat, because everything just sort of meshed well. Look, Robert Downey Jr. is Tony Stark. I think he is the actor that's probably most like his, except save for one, and I'll get to that, because he's charming, but he's kind of a jerk, but you still like him anyway. And the other thing that it had too, which some of the films that followed didn't necessarily have, including things like Iron Man 2, is a really strong villain.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Yeah, Obadiah Stane was fantastic, I thought.
The other thing that it had, and this I think eclipses all of the character and all that stuff. Jon Favreau, Kevin Feige, Bryan Singer, Sam Raimi, they're all fans. They're all big, huge comic book nerd fans. And they know that they can pull these stories out of these books. And so when they come back to, when there's a problem with it, how do we do this? How do we solve that? You get Kevin Feige coming in and saying, look, it's all right there. We've just got to figure out how to get it out. And so that's what I think really set the bar for the Iron Man film in 2008. And then also they'd already done not all of it, but the Ultimate Universe has right there in the Ultimates, one panel at the very bottom of the page is Sam Jackson looking like Nick Fury. It is so him. You cannot look at it and not see it. And so they did a lot of like pre-production work, a lot of times movies will storyboard everything. And that's exactly what they did with the Ultimates. They don't necessarily follow exactly down the line, but they worked out a lot of concepts that they could eventually bring to the screen. And they did that ahead of time, not after the fact, Batman.
Right. And I think that's one thing that they do well is it is not necessarily a panel for panel retelling of the comic book story. They adapt and adjust as needed to bring these stories to screen in a way that makes it work in that medium. But the problem with starting out so big with Iron Man and all of a sudden you now have this new generation, you have this generation of comic book fans that's excited to see it being done and being done well. But you set the bar so high, and just a few months after Iron Man comes out in that early beginning of the summer season, you follow up with the Incredible Hulk, which arguably may not be, and we'll spoiler alert, this may not be on the top of everybody's MCU list, but this was, I think, Marvel's way of saying, the 2003 Ang Lee version, we need to reboot this because we need to bring this character into our world and try and do it the right way and sort of get the origin story out of the way pretty early and then tell the story of this character with a new actor. I never personally sort of felt Edward Norton as, Doc Bruce Banner, belted by gamma rays, turning into the Hulk. The villain and sort of Tim Ross Abomination, to maybe its benefit or detriment, was a little cartoony up on screen. But so give me your thoughts on 2008's Incredible Hulk.
Can I take a swing at that first, Lou? Because I think what I, in retrospect, is so good about that movie, and granted, I'm not going to tell you it's in my top 5. I may not even tell you it's in my top 10.
It's definitely in your top 18, without a doubt.
It's in my top 18, but it's going to depend on the rounding at that point. But I think what you get is you get the overarching theme of searching for the super soldier. And that element is really, really key for that as you go through and developing the Hulk and developing the Abomination. It establishes a story element that will be continued because we're trying to find the next Captain America, right? We don't see that necessarily at first, but it's something that sort of gets unpacked with that.
From a production standpoint, I think that they kind of knew that they needed the Avengers to happen sooner or later. And I feel like the Incredible Hulk is a proof of concept to make sure that the Hulk green monster guy can actually be on screen and not look dumb. And I think if you look back at the Ang Lee Hulk, one of the criticisms, and now I love that movie. I personally think that's a great movie, but it's not a comic book movie. So that's a difference. But if you look at it, part of the problem is the Hulk, the big green monster, looks kind of cartoony. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that really stepped out to me when I was doing my rewatch this year coming up to Infinity War was that the Incredible Hulk with Edward Norton actually looks really good. Story, not so much, but the Hulk itself, the model, looks really good.
And I think that's what this movie is. It's very much more of an action movie as opposed to the let's tell the Jekyll and Hyde story one more time. But it was a way for them to look, they knew where they were going and maybe sort of get some of those things done and out of the way before we get to 2010 and Iron Man 2.
It's my quick thought on the Hulk, and he's not a character that I've enjoyed over the years, but it's one of those movies where it's like Mission Impossible 2. I always say to myself, that movie couldn't have been that bad. I'm going to go back and rewatch it, and then I still don't like it. So now I'm in. Somebody mentioned rewatching this movie. That's what I have to do because I haven't watched it in a long time. I know I didn't like it at the time, but I'm going to go back and rewatch it and see what's there. So that's all I can add.
For what it's worth, I love Mission Impossible 2.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Every other one is great except that.
And I think the issue of Incredible Hulk is that you have, like, as a first time viewing, you have to compare it to what exists before, and that's Iron Man. And because it's not necessarily on the same level as the Iron Man that came before it, you start kind of knocking it down that list. Like, I'll tell you, I've gone back and watched it a couple times now. I think the only real flaw the movie has is kind of a trend for Marvel films, is that the villain is the antithesis of the main character. And so you have the opposites going at each other, and that's the same problem that you'll have throughout the universe. But it's not that bad of a movie if you go watch it again. But it's certainly not my top 5.
Another movie, again, that may or may not be in your top 5, and a movie that I've watched over and over again, and every time I sort of walk away from it, I come out feeling differently. Sometimes I just enjoy it for it being a popcorn movie. Sometimes I don't like it as much. Iron Man 2, again, the first of the sequels, still is a Jon Favreau film, but the thing that I think was I don't want to say a mistake, but that I felt was lost in this was Iron Man was such a deep character-driven story. In Iron Man 2, there's a lot going on, and it really wasn't necessarily about Tony Stark. It was about the family history. It was Ivan Vanko. I loved, and my God, his name just escaped me, Justin Hammer. Gosh, why is his name just popping out of my head? The actor who played Justin Hammer. I'll come back to it. I thought he was phenomenal, but there was a lot going on all at the same time in this film, and it is very much a showcase of special effects and technology. We loved getting introduced to Black Widow, which was one of my favorite parts of the film, but there was a lot of different things going on as opposed to a single strand of a storyline that was being held together by each of those individual elements, if that makes any sense.
I would certainly agree. I think your term popcorn for that hits, and it's not certainly the first movie, but it's not in my bottom 5. And I do like the fact you mentioned Black Widow, one of my favorite characters in this whole MCU. So I do like the fact that we meet her in that movie.
And it was Sam Rockwell, who I love, and I just don't know why his name it jumped out of my head, but he wasn't, like, was the villain Justin Hammer, was the villain Ivan Vanko, like Obadiah Stane was the villain, like you had somebody, but here there was just a lot of different things all happening at once. It was a fun, entertaining movie, and I love sort of that final, battle scene. But in terms of story and advancing maybe the character of Tony Stark, it was not necessarily my favorite.
So I have a question for you, Lou. This is something that we talked about a whole bunch on the other show. Did you catch any of the Disney references? So Howard Stark, that's Uncle Walt in your living room. That is absolutely Uncle Walt in your living room. And there was the end song was written by I think it was a Sherman brother, or at least somebody who had ties to the Sherman brothers. That Disney is permeated through that whole movie so much, and it's hard for me. That's why I really like that movie, is because I get to see some of that stuff coming out.
Yeah, so a year later, we get the introduction of Thor, a Kenneth Branagh film, who I think takes this adventurous origin story and I think really does a great job of, again, like Iron Man, Thor was not necessarily, when you think of Marvel Comics and Marvel superheroes, Thor doesn't necessarily jump to the top of a lot of non-comic book fans' mind as being, the first superhero that comes to mind. So give me your thoughts on Thor, especially in terms of how it compares to the other origin story we had in terms of Iron Man.
Well, I'll step up with the first. I loved Branagh as the director here. I loved his previous films. I love his Shakespeare films. So there was a Branagh quality to this. I thought he did it very well, and I thought the story was quite good. I mean, I know my sons diss the Thor movies, but I loved the first one, and it simply because of the journey of the character. I mean, that's just a wonderful, of all things, it's a wonderful character movie, and that's why I love it.
I think from a casting perspective, there's a couple of interesting things. Look, to be able to pull in Anthony Hopkins as Odin, clearly, what they had done with the first three films to bring in a character, to bring in an actor of that status speaks volumes. It was interesting, and you can go back and see videos of this online. Obviously, we all love the character of Loki. I know some people like the actor who portrays Loki a lot for a lot of different reasons, but he actually originally was cast and screen tested as Thor before they hired Chris Hemsworth. And now seeing him do that is so very off-putting, because he is so, you talk about villains that you love to hate. Loki very quickly established himself as this was not just a tentpole picture, but Loki established himself as a tentpole character and villain.
And his story is interesting, right? It's not a cartoony character. There's a fascinating backstory there and why he did what he did. So it's good. I think it's good stuff with both key characters.
Yeah, I appreciated. Oh, I'm sorry, Dusty. I appreciated the introduction of Coulson as well as Hawkeye in this one.
It's interesting. The vision of being able to set up what they knew was going to be coming so far down was very brilliantly done.
Yeah, I just like the expansion that you have with these stories. Of course, I think at least from my perspective, the traditional story of Thor is that he needed to learn that humility, and Odin cursed him and sent him to Earth, and he became a crippled doctor, right? He had to learn how to help people. Slightly different story here, but just that character journey, but then also just the expansion to be able to see that, this is what Asgard looks like. These are Hawkeye, to get the expansion with Coulson. Those were all, I think, very, very key things that just, after we got through the first couple of movies, we knew that we were going to see some type of serial. And to me, that's what would always separated the Marvel comics, is that there was some continuity that went longitudinally through them. And, as we started getting into it, at least from my perspective, I went into it not expecting to have everything with a nice tight bow on it at the end of it, but to get the extension. What's the next step? Where is it going to go from? And I thought that movie did a nice job of expanding in a couple of different directions.
Yeah. And what the film that was to follow just a few months later that summer in July, the Joe Johnston film, Captain America, the First Avenger, we talked about the importance of casting. And Chris Evans originally turned down the role of Captain America. He almost had to sort of be convinced to take it. Again, having come from being Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, in the not so very awesome Fantastic Four. I wanted to love that movie, for a lot of different reasons. I loved the characters. I loved the story, but he was probably one of the shining lights of that film. But you talk about the benefit of casting the right actor to play a role. Look, Captain America was a character in a story very much rooted in, the time that he was created, this sort of anti-Nazi, World War II era. Some people might say, well, he's not necessarily the most exciting character in the world, but Chris Evans being Captain America, and Chris Evans being that kid from Brooklyn, is what made this film. And this film, I will tell you, spoiler alert, is very, very high on my list of favorite movies.
Absolutely. This is one of my favorite. I love Joe Johnson. I mean, Rocketeer is a great movie, and I love his style of things. And they could not have gotten a better person for that movie.
This was the movie that I waited my entire life for. Okay. This was it. And they did it right. And I doubted when they picked Chris Evans because he was the Human Torch. I doubted that. I was like, what are they doing? And it was perfect casting. The movie is, spoiler alert, it's in my top 5. I love the look of it, the feel of it, the World War II period. And yes, I love the Red Skull and Agent Carter. And anybody that says Captain America isn't exciting, Lou, you send them my way.
No,
and I'll be right there with you.
Yeah, to me, that set the bar at that point. That was easily of these first 5. That's my number one of the first 5, and it's for those reasons. But also just consider the technology, because you were able to see Steve Rogers go from that scrawny kid from Brooklyn into the super soldier, and I think Ray, I know you're the big Cap fan here on this call, but I don't know if you ever saw the direct-to-video Captain America film from the early '90s.
Oh, yes, I did. Unfortunately, I did. Yes,
that's what I had. I won't admit to anything that I did with that film, but the fact of the matter is that was a comparison, and you were able to find this kid that you were able to see just the character of the character, if you will. And that's what really rung true to me. And then there were tons of Easter eggs in there. You had the original Human Torch in the background at the fair before they went off. Of course, you have Bucky, and you establish that relationship. Cap was second fiddle to Bucky, prior to that transformation.
Isn't that wonderful how they did that? Right. They did.
Yeah. It's just, it was really tremendous.
I remember.
And for me, that straight to video movie doesn't exist in my mind. I go from the 1960s cartoon, remember that? And then I go to this. So there you go.
Yeah. If you want the video, I'll send it to you.
All right, fair enough.
I remember before this movie came out, the original writer of the script, they did a rewrite of it, and usually when you hear rewrite, that's not a red skull, it's a red flag to start getting a little bit nervous. But it worked, and I think one of the things that I loved about this film is not just Haley Atwell, and if you're listening, call me, but you love this character, and I don't mean the character of Captain America. You love the character of Steve Rogers. You love there's a lot of emotion and sensitivity in terms of this being such a strong character-driven film. And like Peter Parker, I and I'm drinking out of my Captain America Tervis, as you can see. I loved this character because I loved what he stood for. I loved his integrity, and a lot of what we see that is the hallmark of Steve Rogers in this film is interesting as we go on to things like Civil War, how this I will follow orders wherever they will take me, how he develops as a character later on, and that shift from becoming not just a super soldier, but the perfect soldier that will follow orders changes as we move farther along and eventually to where we are now with coming up with Infinity War. But again, casting is key. Tommy Lee Jones as Colonel Phillips, Hugo Weaving as Red Skull, I thought was awesome. And again, other sort of secondary characters that start to make their presence felt in some additional films was just so well done here. And again, like you guys, I loved the fact that it's such a period piece too.
And one of the things about the Captain America character, when I was a kid, it wasn't, I could identify as a fellow teenager or something like that. It was something you aspired to. You saw these courage and honor and all those things that you hope that one day you could, at least somehow or another approach that. And that was very old timey comic books. And what they did was, they updated it in this film, and it was just done wonderfully. I mean, that could have been, a very corny, fall on your face type of movie, and it wasn't at all. And one thing on Haley Atwell and Agent Carter, I don't know if we're going to get to it later, so I'm going to plug it real quick. Those 2 seasons, Agent Carter, one of my favorite television shows. And the fact that we only got 2 seasons is a shame, but you know what? The way it works, those 2 seasons, it's a wonderful capsule. Go out, get the DVDs or get it digitally and just sit down and watch those 2 seasons. My wife and I did that recently, and it's thoroughly enjoyable. It's good stuff.
And there's the one shot. There's the Iron Man 3 DVD has the one shot of Agent Carter too.
Yes.
Absolutely. Agent Carter, I think, is one of the most underused. Well, she's used a whole lot. I just want more of her,
Not in a creepy way. We mean this in the most affectionate way.
No, not creepy. No, I want more Agent Carter on screen. That's the difference. To me, Cap is all about integrity, and that's permeated all the way through. Even through the trailer for Infinity War,
Right. Yeah. Steve Rogers, his whole kind of point is that he'll fight for what he believes is right, and then he'll get knocked down all the time, and he'll never quit. He'll always keep on coming. He'll tell you, "I can do this all day." Anytime he faces a challenge, he will tell you, "I will do this. I can do this all day." So just keep throwing him at me. But that's just just on my top 5 too.
Captain America, very, very high. Although the next film that we got in 2012 is probably higher on my list. And we didn't realize that probably at the time that this was going to sort of round out what is affectionately known as phase 1 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But Marvel's Avengers in 2012, we could spend more than a single show talking about it. And again, same thing happens. Zach Penn was originally brought in to write the script back in 2007. 3 years later, a little fellow by the name of Joss Whedon is brought in to rewrite the script. And look, I loved Joss Whedon. I love what he did with some of his other stuff. I was a huge Firefly fan. Say that 3 times fast. So I originally, easily bought into who they were going to entrust this to, and look, the numbers clearly speak for itself in terms of, the $1.5 billion that it brought in. But Avengers is, man, when you look at the overall Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's hard not to say this might be as close to the perfect superhero, team up action film that we have anywhere in the list.
I would say it definitely delivered at that point, Lou. I mean, we've been treated to different superhero team ups in a number of different media over the course of the years, be it through comics, through cartoons, whatever it turns out to be. And when you got to this, you ended up seeing these people. They just didn't get together and they're all chummy, right? They had to get together. They had to work through some things. It continues this whole theme that we have seen, which is just that they're real people. They're real people first and foremost, and then they have to do something else. And then, added to that, you have a likable or valid villain with Loki, and then obviously the Chitauri and whoever else, and teasing Thanos. I mean, all those things that you had at the end of Avengers 1, that was scooping up the ice cream, putting the whipped cream on, and somebody found the cherry.
And again, I don't need to comment on this, but if you look at the very end, again, when you meet Thanos, and again, to challenge them is to court death, and what that means as we move forward, is like, I look back and I'm like, oh God, like if it was supposed to be a throwaway Easter egg or not, it was awesome. But, again, and I give a lot of the credit for this film's success to Joss Whedon because it's not, and I don't mean this in a like when I say popcorn movie, it's just fun. Maybe this is not just a popcorn movie. The interactions between the heroes and the villains and the characters was very smart and very deliberate, and we came to not only learn about but love them, and we saw some of these the rapport between some of these characters, good, bad, or otherwise, Thor and Hulk, and obviously Cap and Black Widow, as well as the roles that Cap and Iron Man play in terms of leading the Avengers going forward was just done so well. And again, we talk about the importance of casting characters. This was the importance of casting a good director.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And you also see the interaction between the heroes and the people of New York City as well in a very real way, in an interesting way. And I have to say that there was my favorite line from any superhero movie is in this film. Okay. If you remember, they jump out of the Quinjet, Iron Man and Thor with Loki, and Black Widow warns Cap, and she says, they're basically gods. And she's telling him, don't. And his response is, and I'm going to read this, there's only one God, ma'am, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that. And I love that line. And it fits perfectly for who Captain America is and where he came from. It's just great. So
I still smile. I'm with you, and I'm still smiling as you said that. I'm like, oh, I love that line. It's,
I thought you were going with something my son likes to say, Hulk, smash.
But yeah, I mean, it's to me, it's as close to a perfect film in terms of the characters, the special effects, the interaction, the villain that you love to hate. Again, that introduction in this film, again, to Loki and how he interacts with the others as well as them. This accidental, forced team coming together. Really does, and I think it's very much in terms of translating the comics to big screen was also well done too. Okay, moving on. I want to move on because I know we have so much to get to. Phase 2 really begins in May of 2013 with Shane Black's Iron Man 3, and this is one that I have found from talking to people. For some people, it's a love it or hate it film. I have seen people rank it in their top 5. I've seen people rank it in their bottom 5. This one was, and again, for those of you who are comic book fans, you heard that Ben Kingsley is going to be in there. You hear that the Mandarin is going to be in there. Who the Mandarin is and who Trevor Slattery are two very different people. And for those of you guys maybe who are more familiar with the comics, this is not necessarily how the comic book story went in terms of the telling of the Mandarin story.
Definitely not.
Right, but I think that's what Marvel paid attention to is they said, okay, we've got, we're going to make the bad villain bad, and then they took the ending of it or the twist of it and they said, oh, it's not him. And then I guess spoiler alert, but I think that was great because everyone goes into the movies going, oh, Ben Kingsley, this guy's going to be a great villain. And then he turns out to be not so much. And
Trevor, who likes soccer.
But that's what they did great, is that they took the expectation. They knew what the fans were expecting to see. And they said, no, we can give you something different and entertaining. And they did that.
Well, because this is not an Iron Man movie. This is a Tony Stark movie. Right. Most of this movie is not him in his armor. It's him out of it.
In fact, at the end of this movie, he completely... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and it's a very good example.
I was going to say, at the end of this...
All right, Stuart first and then Ray. Go ahead.
All right. At the end of this movie, he completely dismantles all of Iron Man. He takes the thing out of his chest. I mean, he is putting away Iron Man away. And part of that has to do with the arc that he had that sort of culminated in him going up into space and detonating the bomb in the Avengers, right? So he comes back down to Earth and he's scared. He's really scared that he can't fix everything. And then that, I think, first off, I think it should not be the beginning of phase 2. I think it should be the coda of phase Phase 1. I think it's placed wrong. Secondly, I think it informs all of his character arc up through and including Infinity War.
So I was going to say this film does a very good example. Is a very good example. I'm sorry, of two things. One, of post-traumatic stress disorder, because that's exactly what Tony has going through post Avengers, Avengers, and then it's also doing a great job of showing that the hero is vulnerable and he's not this perfect, pedestal character. He has flaws, and those flaws become apparent later down the line. But yeah, this is a great film for that. But it is very much a Tony Stark film, not necessarily Iron Man himself.
Okay, so I fall into the category of the group that just can't stand this movie.
What is it for you? Is it the house party?
It's number 18, by the way, on my list.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
Yeah, once I got past the first half hour, I was like, okay, yeah. And then the rest of it was like, nope, can't do it. I just... I'm sorry, I know people don't want to hear this, but the kid annoyed me. Tony Stark, who I love as a character for the rest of the movie, annoyed me. Pepper Potts, who I normally like, she annoyed me. It was just, there was nothing. I can't, and I've gone back and watched it. I can't do it. I just can't.
So if this is number 18, I have to guess that the next one is number 17 for you.
And Ray, I will say that in terms of the scene with the kid in the garage, I understood why it was there. I felt like you could have taken it out, but spoiler alert, I think that was left in there and put in there for a very deliberate purpose, and not just to sort of help Tony get through what he was doing and sort of start his journey of mentorship that he continues later on in places like Civil War with another character that I so love very much. Don't be surprised if you don't see that kid again.
Well, that's unfortunate, but I don't disagree with the idea and the concepts that you're talking about here. I just don't think it was very well done. So I didn't find it interesting.
Listen, it's not my favorite film. The final battle scene is a great popcorny fun. Again, it's not an iron. It's it's robotic Iron Man. Going out and seeing all the. If you're an Iron Man fan, seeing all the different suits there was really neat. But it does lead to the Alan Taylor film Thor: The Dark World, which you are already starting to hint might not be in your top 5, 10, 17 films, but
it makes my top 15 if you get the point.
This one is in my top 17 or 18. I think there were opportunities that were unfortunately squandered here. And again, part of the things that I didn't that didn't resonate with me is that I thought that Malekith was not a villain that I cared about very much. I didn't empathize with him very much. He didn't say very much. He didn't do very much. I understood the idea of where this is going to fit in terms of Infinity War and the stones, but I think that this was not necessarily one of the shining moments. And again, it's not necessarily the casting of Thor, because I love Chris Hemsworth. Maybe it was, directorial choices, but this was a little bit of a slow moving film for me, save for, the Tom Hiddleston scenes and a few bright points here and there.
Yep, this is the bottom of my list. There's no secret there, but I think what does it for me is I'm kind of a movie buff. So when outside production things translate to the screen with the things that happen behind the scene with this film, in terms of directors and certain actors, actresses, and how they relate to all that, when that translates to the screen of them not looking like they're giving their all, it's noticeable in this film in particular. And that kind of got to me, is I never bought into it. I think outside of the Infinity Stone implication of this film, and maybe more solidifying Chris Hemsworth as Thor for me. I didn't like the film at all.
You know, this film is almost like the ex-girlfriend. There's a lot of it that you didn't like. There was a few bright moments here and there. I think the mid-credit scene with the collector might have been one of the brightest parts of Thor: The Dark World. But fortunately, Marvel is able to come back with the most wonderful, sweetest, hottest, awesomest girl on the planet, and her name is Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which came out next year, with the following year. I think for a lot of people, this ranks very, very high on their list. I want to hear from you guys first in terms of your thoughts on Cap, and maybe Ray, since you are fully decked out in Cap gear. I'm in my Spider-Man underoos, but you are in all of your TMI all over the place. Give me your thoughts on the Russo brothers, who I love so very much, and what they do here in terms of post-Avengers with Captain America: Winter Soldier.
Best superhero movie of all time. That's what I'll say right out of the chute. Mix of action. It's got political intrigue. It's got all of the spy stuff that I'm a big fan of. And people don't realize that that's in the history of Cap with his relationship with S.H.I.E.L.D. over the years in the comic books. You get wonderful character insights. The special effects are off the charts. I love the helicarriers, although we saw them, one of them before, obviously. They made Batroc the Leaper cool. Who thought that would ever happen? I mean, come on. I love the elevator scene where, Cap sees what's happening and he asks everybody, does anybody want to get off before we start? The scenes between Cap and Bucky, combat, the hand-to-hand stuff is some of the best I've seen. So, and you know what? It's Captain America, so he gives an inspirational speech to the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. And I loved the Falcon's response. It was something along the lines of, did you write that down or did you just do it off the cuff or off the top of your head? So there is nothing to dislike about this film. If you haven't seen it, go see it, buy it. There you go.
Go ahead, Jesse.
So it was a couple movies ago where opening day became the norm for specifically me and my son. I didn't take him to see Iron Man 1, but by the time we got to Avengers, it was, you're sick today, son. You're not going to
That's good parenting right there. Right?
For lunch. No, I don't know. No, I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying that that's the mark of a good parent or anything like that. You can make your own conclusions from there. But I'll tell you, when we were sitting in that theater for Cap 2 and Dr. Zola comes on the screen in the bunker, I mean, that was like we were elbowing each other. We were so excited at that point. And it was such a good movie from start to finish. You establish and you expand characters. You get to be a little bit wary of the Black Widow, right? You know, there's some different things that go on there.
But you love that, right? You love that.
Oh,
it's so wonderful. That's her, right?
Again, it's the next chapter. And maybe that's just my perspective in going in it. The books that you read, not every chapter is just tops the next. Some of them have to develop, and what you see here is that the world is much more complex now. It's a more complex world for Cap than what it was in the first movie, right? The good and evil was very, very blatant in Cap 1. Now there's some shades of gray in Cap 2, and then you put the complexity of his buddy Bucky, being the Winter Soldier, and then how would you wrestle with that? It's fascinating story.
This whole movie is and you said it's nonstop from beginning to end. There's no downtime in this movie. But it's a relationship movie. It's a relationship of the change in the relationship between Cap and Black Widow, between Cap and himself, between Cap and S.H.I.E.L.D. And you see that. And look, I watched this movie last night, actually, and actually went back and I watched the elevator scene again. And just those subtleties and credit goes to, there's that subtle change that sort of goes on his face when he sees one of the guys sweating and he knows what's going down. And that was such a small yet pivotal moment for the character himself and all the things that are going to devolve as it goes on. But the relationship between Cap and everybody around him was just so well done in this film.
To me, the thing that sets this movie apart from all of the other movies, and no spoiler, this is my number one movie. So when we get there, I've already answered that question. If you were watching the show, if you were watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on Tuesday night, you saw an episode, it had some things with S.H.I.E.L.D., whatever. Somebody said, I got to go catch a boat. Then that was Sitwell. You saw him on the movies that Friday. And you're like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And then S.H.I.E.L.D. falls down and collapses. And it's all filled with Hydra. And you're like, how is this going to affect my show? And so then you go to your show on Tuesday night and everything is changed. Like, I have been wanting that sort of
consistency,
cross promotion,
Yeah.
synergy, whatever you want to use. I've been wanting that in my movies since I was a little kid. And so when I saw that, I flipped out. That was great.
Yep. I remember seeing the movie as well and going, oh my God, like it literally tied in to what I just saw. And I couldn't wait for next Tuesday to see how it all played in together. And that we haven't really seen that done and executed the same way, intentionally or otherwise, in terms of the TV, the movies, or even the Netflix series.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I wish they'd continue on it because I think it's a great concept of, what better way to continue on? Oh, maybe they reference something back. Well, now I've got to go watch the movie again just to make sure that I understand everything that just happened. But
they've done it. Great. They've done it to little bits of degrees. I mean, at some point, Nick Fury's like, "Oh, I got this from a friend of mine," and if you watch the show, you know that Coulson gave him the thing, and whatever. So they've done it to small amounts, but nothing that big. This was huge.
I just loved the progression of, because when we see that sort of naivete of Steve Rogers go away and all of a sudden he becomes so very suspect and it changes his path going forward, I think for me that was only eclipsed. Look, one of the things I love about these movies is that when the credits roll, like, it's so not over. Like, so much of the good stuff happens after the credits, where we are introduced to Strucker and Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch and what's going on here, and again that tie into what is really happening with S.H.I.E.L.D. There was a little Easter egg where Stephen Strange was mentioned in here, and if you looked at the map as they were getting the
targeting everybody,
you saw some of those names. Banner was mentioned in there too. So, and it was not, he did not have a huge role, although it was pivotal. But when Gary Shandling goes to Sitwell and he whispers in his ear, "Hail," I'm like, "Oh, are you kidding me?"
Right, because
you don't see it coming, right?
Last time we saw Gary Shandling was in Iron Man 2, and okay, that's kind of a cool little throwaway part, whatever. And he wasn't in the TV, he wasn't in any of the other movies, and so okay, they got Gary Shandling once, and then you see him again, and you're like, oh, cool, they got he's Hydra. Oh my God.
And it was, and Jesse, I'm with you. It's one of those moments that you look at the people who're sitting next to it and you're like punching your kid in the arm, like, oh my God, I can't believe he just had Hail Hydra. And all I did for 3 years after was whisper to people, "Hail Hydra." The email I sent you guys today, at the end of the email, it said #Hail Hydra. So, this, and one of the things about this is you leave Winter Soldier and you're like, wow, how can they possibly top this film? What are they going to do? Who are they going to introduce to us to eclipse this film? And just a few months later, we get Guardians of the Galaxy, where a lot of people who are not comic book nerds are going, Guardians of the what? I think this was the first time I went, oh, this is going to be the movie where Marvel takes a step back. I don't know who these characters are. What's a Groot? Chris Pratt, like I didn't really know of him. Like he seemed to be a chubbier dude in the TV commercials I saw, but I didn't know what a Drax or a Star-Lord was. I knew a little bit about James Gunn, so again there was that confidence there. But this for me was the Marvel really knows what they're doing. Like. None of us really, as much as we didn't know about Iron Man, we heard of him. Most people never heard of Guardians of the Galaxy before. So do you guys remember going into this, what your thoughts were, in early 2014 before the film came out?
My initial thought was, you're going to have this little animal, raccoon, squirrel. What's going on here? I was just like, this is going to, my expectations were not high going in. But,
especially when it said Bradley Cooper was going to do the voice.
But you know what? They broke the mold, right? I mean, they created something that none of us expected in terms of, well, quite frankly, everything about it. I mean, the quirky characters, the humor, but it was just this exuberant fun with a great story and characters that going in, you were like, who? Or come on, and you cared about them. And that's critical to story. They've done this throughout throughout the MCU. They understand that characters matter and people have to care for them. You don't have to like them. It's always good that you like them. You can hate them too, but you have to care about them. And this was done beautifully.
And you're right. You cared about them very quick. You cared about characters you had never heard of before. Excuse me,
right.
Very, very quickly.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I went into that movie with no expectation. I didn't really know a whole lot about them. That was not part of the read list at the time. I had bought the Rocket Raccoon miniseries back in like 1986. I don't know what I ever did with that. But the fact of the matter is that I was just amazed through it. And I'll tell you, the other thing about that movie that really set it apart was the soundtrack. Yeah. And I think that made it very, very memorable. It set it apart. And I would suggest that, to me, that was the closest thing to a modern day Star Wars. You were introduced to a bunch of different characters, and you had this odd bunch, and somehow they managed to save the galaxy.
I would agree with that comparison. Absolutely.
I mean, praise doesn't get much higher than that, putting Guardians of the Galaxy and Star Wars in the same sentence.
And you're right about the music too. The music, how people try, right? Many movie they try to get and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But who doesn't have that soundtrack on, wherever, iTunes or whatever?
Who didn't walk out of the movie and go on their phone and download the soundtrack like that night and then listen to it? Oh, my kids were begging every time we got in the car, picking them up from school. All they wanted to hear, look, my daughter's a vinyl record collector now because of, and I blame or thank Guardians of the Galaxy.
Yeah, I had immediately bought the soundtrack before I hit my car.
Yep, this movie is my son's favorite because of the soundtrack. He plays, was it Come and Get Your Love every night when he goes to sleep. And I don't know why, but Groot in that song, that does it for him.
And I think this film was arguably the perfect blend of story, action, character, and just the right amount of humor, which I think maybe Guardians 2 may have sort of taken to, another level. But this, look, and for a long time, I didn't even like watching the beginning of the film. Like, my heart was breaking at the beginning. I'm like, what kind of movie am I sitting through? What is a superhero movie? It was like a commercial for Deadpool. Like, you think you're getting a superhero movie, and it's really like this sad, touching love story, but you instantly cared about the self-proclaimed Star-Lord. And again, perfect casting, because Star-Lord was this wonderful amalgam of Mal Reynolds and Han Solo and Captain Kirk, and there's this little rough edge about him, but he's also funny, and there's this subtle arrogance about him, which again continues to grow. And as we saw the trailer for Infinity War, I think he has some of the best lines in the Infinity War previews. But this film ranks incredibly high on, I think, and all of you are sort of shaking your heads. Yes. Very, very high on the list.
Very much so.
There was a lot of, and again, in terms of casting, there was a lot of chemistry I felt in this film too. You know, look, the same way that the Avengers were sort of accidentally thrown together, all these characters were thrown together, but they made it work and they meshed and they melded. And I didn't know what a Groot was beforehand, but everybody, all we wanted was a talking Groot, or a little rocket raccoon when we were done. But
Speaking
very,
of
very
Mal
high
Reynolds, did you catch the Nathan Fillion cameo in that?
So go ahead and explain. Also, quickly explain who Mal Reynolds was and the Nathan Fillion cameo.
So Firefly was the Joss Whedon thing. James Gunn and the head of the ship was a captain by Mal Reynolds. His name is, the guy who played him was Nathan Fillion. Nathan Fillion and James Gunn are very good friends. Nathan Fillion had a cameo in the Guardians of the Galaxy. If you remember the movie, Groot sticks his fingers up some guy's nose. That's Nathan Fillion in makeup and CG costume.
The next film chronologically.
Can I add one thing?
I'm sure. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, just real quick. The interesting point, I think, one of the interesting points about this is it set the bar very high on the humor front.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as we get into other films, we can talk about whether the other ones came close to hitting it or not. But I thought it was, in terms of melding humor into a superhero movie, it was flawless, and it really did set the bar very high.
And so to that point, which I think is a great segue to Avengers Age of Ultron, does the bar sometimes get so high that a good, entertaining movie suffers because of maybe when it was released, right? We've had all of these films. We've had, Guardians of the Galaxy, and we've had these other, huge movies like the Avengers. And then Age of Ultron comes. Again, Joss Whedon comes back. And I think this one, too, can sometimes be controversial because it was originally, when it came out, it had a lot of wonderful critical acclaim. And then I think the more sometimes people thought about it or watched it again, it started to get nitpicked a little bit in terms of what it was or wasn't what it wasn't. I thought James Spader, again, as Ultron, I don't want to even say the voice of Ultron, again, was a wonderful choice in terms of his portrayal of that character. But so give me your thoughts, and then I'll share mine in terms of Age of Ultron. So Corey, why don't you go first?
So for me, Ultron wasn't, it's not on my top 5, and I would almost say it might not even be on my top 10, but I thought the film was entertaining. I thought going into it, I was expecting it to beat the original Avengers, and I think because of that, I was not as entertained as I walked out, but I do like that it was more grounded in reality of there are implications to the things that we're doing. Some of the decisions that I've made have now cost people's lives and cost irreparable damage to the thing that we're trying to accomplish. So that's really what I walked away with.
Yeah, I loved it. I think you're right about sometimes, we nerds, you can see how this happens over the years. They tend to, sometimes a movie comes out of the chute and everybody loves it. And then all of a sudden, 6 months or a year later, they're nitpicking it to death. But I thought Spader was wonderful. I thought that the idea, what you mentioned, Corey, the idea of the consequences of our decisions, and what Tony Stark and Banner were doing. I thought that was all very, very interesting. I love the movie. I mean, certainly on the special effects and the action, and just some of the lines that Ultron had, I think could provoke all sorts of, it did in our house, all sorts of interesting discussions and talks. And I don't think the movie gets enough credit for that, quite frankly.
I think this movie was scarier for like a child's perspective, but like at the previews alone, playing the "I've Got No Strings on Me," and it's a female singing it slow, and it's a little No, I'm not taking my kid. First to see.
I think for it to be the Avengers, you have to have some threat that requires all these superpowered people to get together, right? I mean, that's what we had with Avengers 1. If the aliens were going to invade New York City, you're going to need more than one guy. And I would just go back and I would say perhaps that's where Thor 2 falters, that if this is such a horrible thing, why doesn't he have backup? He knows these people, right? But when we get to Avengers 2, to me, it was essentially a retelling of Avengers 1, because instead of aliens, it's a bunch of robots, right? And how are the stakes raised from attacking New York? And I don't know that I captured that. That being said, we did get some new characters. We did expand in that way. And one of the things that I always enjoy doing on the way home from any of these team movies is debating who was the hero of the movie. You know, that wouldn't have happened if whoever hadn't done whatever. And that's, you know, that was always the fun thing, you know, to talk about was, well, if this, then whoever, and I think that's what helps them blend so much. I enjoyed it. It probably is in my top 10. I didn't rank them all 1 to 18, but I did enjoy it. Although I probably enjoyed Avengers 1 a little better.
You know, I think it was a fun, I think this movie does a few, look, it was a fun movie to watch, but I think it was almost more of a setup movie than anything else, right? So think about, you know, Thor's nightmare in terms of how that hints at Infinity War. Think about how Tony Stark, you know, these feelings of guilt start to set up Civil War. There was no one character for, you know, look, Hawkeye seemed to almost be, you know, the central character for a good part of this film, when he certainly was very much almost a secondary Avenger in ones in the past. So I think it's more of a film that other films build upon, as opposed to one that maybe on its own might rank super high. And again, this is one I've heard, you know, people put it near the end, and some people do have it in their top 10. But as we go forward to 2015, because again, we still have a bunch that I want to get to, we talked about Guardians of the Galaxy being this standout, breakout hit with characters that we really maybe didn't know about or had heard about. And I think that's very much what the next film is, because we know who Spider-Man is. Did everybody really know who or what an Ant-Man was before this came out? What I did know that I loved, and I keep coming back to this, was the importance of casting. You want to talk about a film where the casting of the main character with Paul Rudd being Ant-Man could make or break a film. Paul Rudd made this film. And this was, I think, one of the first films really that could sort of operate on its own as a standalone film, as opposed to being tied to any of the ones that came before it. And certainly, you know, in terms of Civil War later on, but it wasn't unlike Ultron, was not a setup film. This is one like a Black Panther that can sort of sit and exist by itself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it was a smaller film, but I don't use that word as a negative. I don't.
Pun intended. Pun intended. It's a smaller film.
I do not mean that as a negative. It was a smaller film, but it was a wonder. I liked it. It was a good story. You know, it was different from the other films. You know, I've heard many people say, and they're right, it was a heist film. I knew the Ant-Man character, but I could understand most people probably didn't. So they're coming into that wondering. And I think Paul Rudd was perfect in that role.
Now, Ray, did you know the Scott Lang Ant-Man or the Hank Pym?
Well, Hank Pym is my traditional.
Okay. Right. What I appreciated for this was obviously Paul Rudd, and then including both of those characters, including the Hank Pym character who sort of invented everything, but then giving it to Scott Lang, which is something from the comics, and what little comics I have read did reference that. And so that was kind of a cool little thing, because you don't really want to go back and have Michael Douglas, a young Michael Douglas, although we did see that in this movie. You don't really want that. I know it worked really well for me. And Luis is awesome.
Well, and I think, because look, if you look at this film, going back to the villains, this was not necessarily a villain that you really hated all that much or heavily invested. This film rests solely on the shoulders of Paul Rudd. He is a likable guy. He is incredibly charismatic. You fall in love with him in terms of, it is like a 70s, late 60s, early 70s heist movie, but you love him because of his motivations and why he does what he does. And because I think he's also a relatable character. He's not a guy that was given any sort of incredible superpowers. He's got a pretty cool suit. And, he's got some cool tech knowledge and things like that. But he's not godlike, superhuman, or, even a super soldier.
So he was struggling to make ends meet, right? He wanted to see his daughter. I mean, those were the motivations of it. And I thought that was a really interesting take on the character. Like Ray, Hank Pym is the Ant-Man that I grew up with. But, Scott Lang was enjoyable. I would say this, we have the return of that theme of searching for the super soldier, or how do we do it? And that's the yellow jacket costume. That's what they're trying to get to. So I like how that, was a tip of the cap. It wasn't necessarily the central part of what was going on. But if I could say one last thing about it, it's that Baskin Robbins always find out.
Always find out.
And look, and you're right. That was the right amount of humor in that film, not just from Paul Rudd, but from the other characters as well. I think it struck that ideal balance. And this is the one that closes out what is known as Phase 2. And in May of 2016, we hit Phase 3. We come back to the well with the Russo brothers, and the third in the Captain America trilogy, which was Captain America Civil War. This was was their second, but again, I think Civil War, I have a personal reason why I love this film so much, but again, this was a wonderful balancing act of learning about and loving and getting a deeper relationship with the characters versus it being an action film. Look, leading up to this, and I remember watching some of the Kevin Feige press conferences and things that they were talking about and leaking. It wasn't this. Kevin Feige originally announced this as the Serpent Society film, and then like at the end of the presentation was like, no, it's going to be Civil War. But this was when, all the talk was going on in terms of Marvel trying to get back Spider-Man. And like, I had like a little shrine, like in the corner of my office, like to get Kevin Feige and the Blessed Mother and Peter Parker. Like, I was praying to whoever was going to pull it through. And I'm like, are we going to see Spider-Man? Like, not just in this film, but are we going to see him in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? And yes, my Kevin Feige shrine still remains in the corner of my office because he was able to make that happen. This is another one too that I've seen ranked in people's top 5. I've seen one where it doesn't break their top 10. Give me your thoughts on Captain America: Civil War.
Well, the Cap guy loved it. I thought the source of the Civil War, the issue was fascinating. It was politics without being politics, meaning that, if you're a moviegoer, you don't want to deal with what's going on now. But it was a political issue, but it was one that kind of transcended time and place. And the fight involved the Bucky aspect of it, the Winter Soldier aspect of it was fascinating. I think, without giving it too much away with people that haven't seen it, it was interesting. There's a big scene where, superheroes fight, right? And some people like that, some people don't. I thought
who doesn't like that scene? Oh my God, the airport scene.
I loved it, right? And I loved the humor. But there also was a certain, you kind of knew I guess Scarlet Witch tells Hawkeye at one point, you were pulling your punches in that fight. And you knew that was kind of, you have that feeling, right? But then you get to the battle at the end and the reasons behind that. Why is Iron Man doing what he's doing right now? And that was really quite powerful. And I've had debates with my sons, for example. They don't buy into why Iron Man did what he did. And I said, I buy into it. Think about what he saw on the film, what was revealed to him. So I think that was very, very powerful. My only complaint about this movie is I love the Baron Zemo character, and that was not Baron Zemo. They should have given that guy another name. I'm sorry. They should have saved the real Baron Zemo for another movie. So there you go.
Right, because the villain, one thing this movie lacks, and you can say maybe right. That's going to conclude part 1 of our countdown to Avengers Infinity War. Stay tuned for part 2 next week, because obviously we have more films to count down. We'll look at what we know, what we think we know, what we expect to see in Infinity War, and we're also going to talk about how this film and the films that preceded it, as well as those that might follow it, might affect the presence of Marvel in the Disney parks, not just domestically, but worldwide. In the meantime, I'd love for you to go to wdwradio.com/community, join our Facebook group, and be part of the conversation about Avengers Infinity War. Share what your favorite film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is. Let us know what you expect from Infinity War, and even play a little armchair Imagineer and tell us what you would like to see from and about Marvel characters and films in the Disney parks, not just Walt Disney World. And of course, if you like this episode, and I really hope that you do, please do me a favor and share this with your friends on your favorite Facebook group or page, and invite them to not just listen to the show, but be part of the conversation and community.
Excelsior!
It's time for our Walt Disney World Trivia Question of the Week, where I invite you to test your knowledge of Walt Disney World's history, or see how well you pay attention to the details, sometimes in what you see, sometimes in what you hear, possibly in what you eat. And if you think you know the answer, you can enter via our online form for a chance to win a Disney prize package. Before we get to this week's question, we're going to go back, review last week's, and select our winner. So last week, I took you over to one of my favorite classic attractions in one of my favorite lands in Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom. It is the Country Bear Jamboree in Frontierland. And your question was simple and about what you hear, which is the music. Because I asked you to tell me who sings Davy Crockett, the Ballad of Davy Crockett, in the Country Bear Jamboree. Thanks to the hundreds and hundreds of you, a lot of entries this week, who knew that the correct answer was Henry, who also sings the Bear Band Serenade, Fractured Folk Song, Mama Don't Whoop Little Buford, along with Wendell, Old Slewfoot, and then Come Again. So I took all the correct entries, randomly selected one, and again, you were playing for my 102 Ways to Save Money for an at Walt Disney World book. All 7 of my virtual audio walking tours of the Magic Kingdom's history, details, and overlooked experiences and stories, all of which, by the way, still on sale for $10 at the WDW Radio shop. A WDW Radio Magic Band cover, some stickers, a pop socket for your phone, and I will also select for you a shirt from our WDW Radio shirt collection. If you go to wdwradio.com/shirts, you'll see not just our collection of WDW Radio logo shirts, but there's Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, pop culture, 80s, and lots more. Because you use the online form, I have your shirt size, and last week's winner, randomly selected, is Mark Patterson. So Mark, congratulations. I'll order your shirt, get your prize package out to you right away. If you played last week and didn't win, that's okay, because here's your next chance to enter in this week's Walt Disney World Trivia Challenge. So we're going to stick with the superhero theme this week, because if and when Marvel superheroes make their way to Walt Disney World, it's not going to be the first time we've seen, heard, both talking and singing, including songs like Santa Claus is Coming to Town right down the middle of Main Street, USA, and meet some true superheroes in the parks. Oh yeah, they dance too. In fact, back in the 90s, there's a hint, these heroes would show off their skills on stage, then meet fans before heading out in their custom van. So your question this week is to tell me, gosh, I'm giving you so many hints, what was the name of this, another hint, not-so-human superhero team, along with one human counterpart, that you could once see and meet in Walt Disney World? You have until Sunday, April 15th, to go to WDWRadio.com, click on podcast, this week's episode, use the online entry form there. Again, you're going to get the book, all 7 audio tours, the Magic Band cover, the stickers, the pop socket, and I will select a shirt for you from our collection. So good luck and have fun. Here's another hint. They love to eat, like me. That's going to do it for this week's show. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in and geek out with us about Infinity War and the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe this week. Don't forget to be part of the conversation and community. It's really more like a family by going to wdwradio.com/community. Thanks as always to all the members of the WDW Radio Nation, including new members like Peter Brown, Danny Osmond, Marcus Vowell, Richard Begley, Jim Webb, and Michael Fanier. If you want to find out not only how you can help the show, but get monthly rewards, including scavenger hunts, we have a private Facebook group, personalized Magic Band covers, logo gear, t-shirts, group video calls, special events, and more, you can go to wdwradio.com/support, and don't forget that a portion of your contribution does go to our Dream Team project to benefit the Make-A-Wish Foundation of America. Couple of quick reminders. Don't forget to join me every Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. Eastern for WDW Radio Live. If you like the WDW Radio page on Facebook, which I hope you do, at facebook.com/WDW Radio, be sure and turn on notifications and see first. So not only we get notified when I go live on Wednesdays, but as I go live from the parks, other special events, and a few things I have planned in the coming weeks that I know you're going to enjoy. If you have a question you want me to answer on the show, email me, lou@wdwradio.com, or call the voicemail at 407-900-9391. That's 407-900-WDW1 with a question, a comment, your thoughts about the Marvel Cinematic Universe and or Avengers Infinity War. Of course, nothing beats a handshake and a hug. That's why I love the opportunity to meet you in person and do monthly meetups in Walt Disney World. Our next meet of the month is going to be Saturday, April 28th, which just happens to be opening weekend of Avengers Infinity War. There's a method to my madness. That's from 1:30 to 3 o'clock p.m. at the Backlot Express at Disney's Hollywood Studios near Star Tours. We could meet, eat, maybe even take a group ride on Star Tours. And that night, Saturday, April 28th, is opening weekend for Avengers Infinity War. Obviously, I cannot wait to see it, and I would love to go and see it with you. So after the meet, I am going to head to Disney Springs to the AMC Theater and see the 7:30 p.m. Saturday night, April 28th show in Auditorium 2. So if your spidey senses are tingling as much as mine are, and you want to see just how big and bad this Thanos guy really is, and are curious where the final Infinity Stone is, please feel free to go to the AMC website or Fandango.com and get your tickets to join us at the theater. And if you're coming, please go to wdwradio.com/community. There you'll see a post about sort of a casual meetup at the theater for Infinity War. Just let me know that you're coming so I can keep an eye out for you. Get it? Sort of a subtle Nick Fury reference. I'll get an eye. Whatever. Hope to see you there. Also, please go to LouMongello.com. Find out how I can help you turn what you love into what you do with some one-on-one or small group coaching. You can also find out how I can come to speak to your conference, to your business, or to your school, and also how you can join me in Walt Disney World for my Momentum Weekend Workshop this October 6th and 7th. I also have one seat left for my weekend retreat, June 1st through the 3rd, also here at Walt Disney World. Again, go to LouMongello.com to find out more. Thanks as always to Becky Menken and the entire team over at Mousefan Travel. No matter where you're going in this world or universe or multiverse, as it were, they can give you a free, no obligation quote with an incredible level of personal service, obviously over at mousefantravel.com. And if you go to celebrationspress.com, you can find out how you can subscribe and order back issues to Celebrations magazine. And if you like the show, and I hope that you do, all I ask is that you please help spread the word. Let others know about it. That's how our family, that's how our community will grow. So share a link to this or your favorite episode over on Twitter or Facebook. And if you can, take just 30 seconds to rate and review the show over on iTunes. I want to thank some recent reviewers like Jagger Lips, who says it's an example of how to do podcasts. It's by far the best podcast available today for somebody other than a paid or professional radio organization. The quality of the production is better than most of the NPR shows, and Lou, with his endless knowledge, endless might be a stretch, of all things Disney, his sincere love of people, that's true, and wonderful humility, get to enjoy the world of Disney. I'm going to leave it in there, from anywhere at any time. And although some episodes are long, like this one, they never turn into endless rambling by people that just want to hear themselves talk. I wish him many, many years of continued success. John Lucas says it's a perfect way to make you feel like you're in Disney, even when you live 16 hours away. WDW Radio is as best as it can get. Death to Pop says, love this podcast. I love Walt Disney World so much, and this wonderful podcast brings the magic and happiness of Disney into my home once a week. And Tom Granby says, simply the best, all the way from the United Kingdom, says, Lou does a fantastic job of bringing the magic of the parks straight to your ears. The podcast is perfect for both first-time Disney park goers and well-established fans of the theme parks and resorts. From fun and informative top 10 lists to reviews of new and established attractions or restaurants inside the parks, Lou manages to keep you well informed on all that's happening in the world of Disney. Every episode is thoroughly entertaining and gives you that little bit of Disney magic that we all need to help the time before our next trip to the parks fly by. Not only is it the best Disney podcast, but it's also right up there with some of the best podcasts around, period. Thank you for everything you do, Lou. Thank you, Tom. And hearing your story is truly inspiring and has helped me push me towards achieving my own dreams. I love it. I appreciate you, man. If there's ever anything I can do to help you, Tom, please let me know. Again, thank you so very much for taking the time to tune in this and every week. I hope you liked part 1 of our look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we count down to Infinity War. Again, please help spread the word. Let others know about it. And more importantly, I hope that this is your best week ever. And remember, you don't need superpowers or a super suit to be a hero and do super things. And while Uncle Ben, Peter Parker's uncle, not the Rice, was right that with great power does come great responsibility, I also think that Aunt May was right too when she said, I believe there's a hero in all of us that keeps us honest, gives us strength, and makes us noble. All you have to do is be kind and encourage others and try and be better than you were yesterday and give without expectation of anything return. Just live a life with honor and integrity and respect, and a life that you can look back on and be proud of. I hope that you truly have a super week this week. So until next time, see ya.
Good morning, Lou Mangello. My name is Mike Cicero. Listen to the podcast regularly, and the particular one that struck me was the emotional responses at Disney World. And I will try to keep this as concise as possible, but Disney is a very special place to me. I went for the very first time in 2010 with some friends that were DVC members. Didn't think I would really get it, and I've been maybe 35, 40 times since then, and obviously get it, love it. My husband and I got engaged at Top of the World Lounge during Wish It's Fireworks in 2016, and just the emotional responses are literally endless there. It's the smell of the lobbies of the hotels. It's even the smells on the attractions. You know you're on, say, Spaceship Earth, or even it's a small world just by the smells, and that's pretty magical. But I think it's truly everything. It's the unbelievable attention to detail everywhere you look. Everything you see is beautiful and intentional, and every person there is kind and genuinely cares about your happiness and your experience. And I think the best emotional response is I leave sad, of course, but I leave wanting to be a better person. I want to be a better leader at my company. I want to be a better husband. I want to be a better friend. I want to be a better example to the world of what being detail-oriented and striving for excellence really can mean. So it is truly a special place. Not everybody gets that, but those that do get it are truly, they're truly changed by it and need to keep going back for that, that refill of emotional fulfillment. So I love the show. I appreciate it. I appreciate that you took the opportunity to listen to this. And I mean from the bottom of my heart that Disney World is a place like no other and brings me more joy than anywhere else on earth. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Hey, Lou. This is Stuart. I am calling because I'm listening to your episode 514 about the top 10 emotional experiences in the Walt Disney World Resort, and I wanted to tell you about something that recently happened to us and our family, although my daughter doesn't know about it just yet. It's pretty amazing, and it involves that community thing that is so awesome. And So we're planning our vacation, and my daughter's favorite character at the time is Baymax, and she got a bunch of pennies, and you might know this, pressed pennies at Walt Disney World are a huge deal, and so she was very excited. But then we did some research, and we realized that the only place you can get a pressed penny of Baymax is at Epcot. And we had decided months ago that Epcot wasn't going to be on our trip this time. And so we're about a month out, and we actually are about a month out as I'm calling this right now. And I put a thing in the box, a post in the box saying, if anybody's able to do this, would you be willing, would you be able? And within 24 hours, I had somebody, within 12 hours, I had somebody saying, yeah, we'll be there tomorrow. Within 24, I had a picture of it in my inbox. So what gets me emotional about this, and of course she paid for it and she's willing to send it to me and all of that. So if you're listening, you know who you are, and I just want to, again, thank you very much. Personally, thank you. But that's the thing that I get from Disney, and especially this community that you've built. Like you've said, you've built the treehouse. We've populated it. It's amazing. I have never been so a part of a group and community. So what I get emotional about is this group and community. And yes, I realize that that's not necessarily the parks, but it is, because we all have the same goal. We all have the same theme, and we all have the same idealism, that when we are a family, we are a group, we are a we, and that is awesome. So, again, thank you to you know who you are. I really do appreciate it. If you need anything, you have my number. And as far as the group, I'll be there in a month. If any of you need any pressed pennies from, let me know. I'll be happy to return that favor. Absolutely happy to. Anyway, join the box, people. If you haven't, do it now. It is family, and we will all go home. All right. Thanks. Bye.
Hi, Lou. It's Colleen Baca from Rochester, New York. I've been listening to your podcast for a couple of months now, and I was just tuning in to the Emotions podcast about emotions in Walt Disney World, and I had to call in. A couple of years ago, I was down in Disney with my extended family. There were about 16 of us, and I was waiting in line for Splash Mountain with my uncle and my cousin, near Splash Mountain. We were waiting to meet Woody and Jessie, and in line, just talking to each other. We weren't really, super aware of who else was in line with us. And when we got up to the front, right in front of us, we realized that there was a little boy who was blind. And the interaction that Woody and Jessie had with this young boy, just stole my heart and really brings a tear to me every time I think about it. They were so, warm and gentle with him, and just the thrill and excitement that you could see for this little boy. He, after he touched Woody's face and realized who it was that he was meeting, it was just incredible. And it's moments like these that really remind you how wonderful and special place Walt Disney World is, and it's exactly the reason why we all keep coming back. thank you so much for all that you do, and I can't wait to hear more from you.
Hi, Lou. This is Amy from Woodbridge, New Jersey, your old stomping ground. I'm calling in response to your emotional episode. That episode really spoke to my heart. I'm still listening to it, but I was a great movie ride tour guide for my first college program, and I have the load music from Movie Ride on my phone, and when I hear it come on, I still get all those butterflies in my stomach like I would before I did every show. And now it's also taken on a new emotion as in having sadness for loss of Movie Ride, but also happy memories. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.
Hi, Lou. This is Steven Schmidt from Detroit, Michigan. I just got through listening to show number 514, Top 10 Emotional Experiences in Walt Disney World. One of mine is when you're on Main Street, USA, and you're leaving the park for the last time, and you're looking back at Cinderella Castle for the last time on your vacation, and it's like you're looking back at the castle thinking, oh my god, when am I going to come back here, not knowing when you're going to be looking at that castle again. Anyway, Lou, keep up the good work. Look forward to your next show. Bye.
Hello, Lou Mangello. It's Darlene Yagi from West Seneca, New York, calling in to say we have 42 days until my birthday trip down to Walt Disney World to meet up with a whole bunch of my Disney family. And then you have 69 days now until that Alaska cruise. The Disney Wonder is so phenomenal. You've got, for the adults, Crown and Fin Pub. You've got Tiana's Place for a rotational dining. You've got the Marvel Superhero Academy for the kids. The Frozen, a musical spectacular, is probably going to be amazing. And then for the adults also, Princess Spa for a massage, or 50 Boppity Boutique to decorate those children up. And then I have 71 days until the Sternbergs and us go down to the world. So, yay! You got a lot coming on. Everybody stay positive. I love you all, and have a wonderful day.